So we've talked about how in the past, North America looked different, right? At some points, it was covered by epicontinental seas. At some points, the mountain ranges we know today didn't exist, then they were formed. In addition to that, it wasn't always the location on Earth where it is now. Because of plate tectonics, Laurentia, North America, actually used to be much, much closer to the equator. And the equator actually crossed over what we now call North America. Okay. So because North America used to be on the equator, it used to be tropical. So it used to be very warm, it used to be very wet. This is why we get extensive limestone and coral reef being deposited. It's also why we have a lot of salt and gypsum deposits, because we used to be somewhere really hot. Okay. There are other factors that contributed to the early Paleozoic climate. For example, the Earth spun faster. Remember what we talked about last week. So days were shorter. The tidal effects were also stronger. This had to do with the location of the continents on Earth, as well as the length of the day on Earth. And there were no vascular plants around to absorb the sun's radiation, right? So plants had not yet evolved to be extensive and vascular like they are today. At this point, we get the Paleozoic's very first ice age. Right? Now, it's not the first ice age ever, it's just the Paleozoic's first ice age. Around this time, Gondwana, remember I told you to remember Gondwana, that was the continent that broke apart from that supercontinent, and it contains what we now include, what we now call South America, Africa, Antarctica, India, and Australia. They were all together into one continent, which we call Gondwana. And during this time, during the late Ordovician, the Gondwana was actually situated over the South Pole. Now, this is really important because anytime you have land over the South Pole, you can get a lot of ice buildup. Antarctica is just covered in ice, right? But if Antarctica wasn't there, we wouldn't have as much ice near the South Pole. It was just like this in the past. When Gondwana was on the South Pole, there was an enormous buildup of ice on the continent. And we know this because even today, we still see evidence of glaciers on all of the continents that used to make up Gondwana, right? We see evidence of glaciers in India. We see evidence of glaciers in Africa and Australia and South America. So how would a glacial event like this impact life on Earth, do you think? If this glaciation, if this snow cover was happening all the way at the South Pole, why did it matter to life on Earth that was elsewhere around the world? Well, a big part of it is that when ice sheets grow in size, that water has to come from somewhere, and that water comes from the ocean. So as water is taken out of the ocean and frozen in ice on land, the sea level has to fall. And when the sea level fell, that actually created huge extinction events, right? There were a lot of animals that lived in that shallow water that weren't able to migrate as the sea level fell. So there were a lot of extinctions of corals, sponges, trilobites. Or about 22% of all known animal families were wiped out at this time, almost a quarter of all the animal families. It seems like the extinction resulted, again, not just from the sea level falling, that was a big part of it, but also because the tropical seas got colder. So the warm water loving animals weren't able to survive. Right? The loss of these shallow water environments is what caused animals to migrate to the available environments. So there was a lot of crowding in the available environments. So this caused this ecological disaster and a mass extinction.